Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Today, déjà fear. Did Ronald Reagan evoke Trump-like jitters among some voters back in 1980? We'll also consider Puerto Rico. Their Democratic primary is Sunday, and it comes as Washington nears a deal to bail out the island, which is drowning in debt. But its legislation, Bernie Sanders says, exacts too high a price. We'll talk about that. Before we get to all that, though, be aware of what's just around the bend. Yes, time for the horse race. And just around that bend on Tuesday are primaries in California, New Jersey, New Mexico, and elsewhere. California is key for its size. It's where 475 Democratic pledged delegates are up for grabs. Enthusiasm is running high. Voters are already casting ballots in record numbers. According to California's Secretary of State, as of Saturday, 1.6 million Californians have turned in their absentee ballots, up about 20% over the 2014 general election. Which Democratic candidate will benefit most as the primary draws near? There are a few factors working in Clinton's favor. California's electorate is likely to be dominated by women, as was the case in 2008 when Hillary Clinton ran against Barack Obama and won. According to the Public Policy Institute of California think tank, Clinton leads among women, 49 to 42% in the state. She also leads among white and non-white voters. Among whites, according to the PPIC poll, Clinton leads 47 to 41%. Among Hispanics, 52 to 43%. Clinton is also expected to garner the majority of votes from African Americans and Asian Americans. And likely helping both candidates, 2 million new voters have recently registered thanks to Governor Jerry Brown enacting motor voter legislation. That should add both more young Bernie voters and more Hispanic voters likely to choose Hillary. But in the eyes of election pundits, next Tuesday, the Eastern Time Zone state of New Jersey will likely be the finish line before California's results even come in. Let's look at the delegate count. Including superdelegates, who can still change their minds, Clinton is now just 71 delegates away from the nomination. With 126 pledged delegates up for grabs in New Jersey and Clinton ahead in the polling that's been done in the Garden State, the news media are poised to declare Clinton the nominee. That's like what happened on the Republican side last week. As the Associated Press declared Donald Trump the nominee, Trump crossed his party's delegate threshold after the AP confirmed that a sufficient number of unbound Pennsylvania delegates indicated that they would be supporting Trump. As to the general election, it is still way too early to say. While state-by-state polling indicates there could be some reshuffling of the electoral map, polling has been scant and a significant number of voters have yet to commit to a candidate. This electoral indecision was perfectly illustrated in Tuesday's Monmouth University poll of the historically Democratic state of New Jersey, where Clinton's lead over Trump has shriveled to just 4 percentage points. In New Jersey, 15% of voters are still undecided, and another 11% indicated that they would vote for a third party or independent candidate. This might be good news for the Libertarian Party's Gary Johnson or the Green Party's Jill Stein, but it shouldn't come as much of a surprise with the major parties' presumptive nominees' unfavorability ratings the highest in modern polling history. All right, joining us to think about all this are Jacob Weisberg, editor-in-chief of the Slate Group and author of the biography Ronald Reagan, and here as well, Dan Labatz, labor activist and author of The Crisis of Mexican Labor. Dan is a Bernie backer and was the 2010 candidate for the U.S. Senate on the Ohio Socialist Party ticket. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Brian.
Do you kind of wish that Bernie would stop campaigning so hard in California?
I do. I mean, the race is over. There's a difference between mathematical certainty and political certainty. There's no mathematical certainty until Hillary crosses the delegate threshold, and as you say, she needs 71 or so more delegates to do that. But politically, there's no remotely plausible way Bernie could get the nomination. And I think that given the unprecedented threat of Donald Trump and the real risk to the basic values that liberals and Democrats hold dearest, that this is not the time to take that risk of weakening an eventual nominee who's already weakened in large part through her own failures.
Dan, same question.
Well, I think, it's interesting that of Bernie supporters, about 25% in a recent poll say that they cannot support Hillary. And I think that it seems to me for Sanders' campaign very important that he continue this into California, because part of what's happening is building a movement, changing consciousness about the question of what kind of politics do you need in America to bring the country, to make it a decent country for all, and also about the question of what is socialism, which is he's identified himself as a socialist. So I think it's not so much, from my point of view, about the defense of historic progressive or liberal values, but about really shifting the country in a more left direction, in a more progressive direction, and that's what's at stake.
History suggests that when a nominee has too difficult a primary contest, that they are more likely to lose the general election. Is there a point beyond which you wouldn't want Bernie to push it if it really risks Donald Trump being our next president?
Well, I think I'm not going to put the onus onto Bernie. I think the question is, can he build a movement? What can happen at the Democratic Party convention? Is it possible to change the minds of the pledged delegates? Is it possible also, there's always things can happen before you get there. So I think he should take this fight as far as possible, and the onus should not be on Bernie Sanders to defeat Trump. It should be on the Democratic Party voters. They'll make their decisions.
Well, the onus is, I would say, Dan, on everybody to defeat Trump. And I sometimes think, how does Ralph Nader get up in the morning and look at himself in the mirror? Because by going through this sort of act of vanity and purism of running as a third-party candidate, I know Sanders isn't running as a third-party candidate, but by weakening the Democratic nominee, who was similarly a flawed nominee, we got 8 years of George W. Bush, we got the Gulf War, and I don't think Nader can avoid responsibility for that, and I don't think Sanders is going to be able to avoid some responsibility if the result of him not giving up when it's over is electing Donald Trump.
Well, of course, I don't agree with that interpretation of Nader's run. I voted for Nader. I support him. It wasn't that Nader took away votes in Florida. It's the Democrats lost the election in 49 other states. What had they done in the rest of the country? How come they hadn't got the votes? I don't think that Nader here is to be blamed in the same way.
Do you think that Nader's run and the impact that had, at least in Florida, which then, was a single factor that flipped the election result? We could identify other single factors like Al Gore losing his home state of Tennessee. But presumably without Ralph Nader, Al Gore is president in 2000. But did it work? That is, did the threat of having that happen again move the Democratic Party to the left since?
Oh, I don't think so. I think the Democratic Party has become a much more not just over in the last, since then, but it has been becoming and continues to become a more conservative party. It's a party now of we'd say, neoliberalism. That is a party of free markets, a party of austerity. And I think that, no, I don't think it had that impact.
Jacob, do you agree? I mean, we do see, I realize it's a very different time than the year 2000, but we do see Clinton hugging, as the media likes to say, Bernie and Bernie voters, rather than kind of ignoring them or dismissing them as ideologically fringy, as may have happened with Gore and Nader in 2000.
Oh, I think Sanders has changed the debate inside the Democratic Party, and Hillary Clinton, to a sort of surprising degree and ironically, is running against Clintonism. I mean, on so many of the key domestic policy points, welfare reform, the crime bill, it's become almost a litmus test in the Democratic primaries to repudiate a lot of the things that Hillary Clinton's husband stood for when he was president, when neoliberalism, by the way, had different meaning, when it was regarded as a kind of reformist, pragmatic liberalism.
You want to define, that term comes up, and I'll bet a lot of viewers don't actually know what that means. Neoliberalism, what? Well, how would you define it?
Well, we probably don't use it the same way. My first job was at a magazine called the Washington Monthly, which called itself neoliberal, and it was run by this man named Charlie Peters, who was a strong Democrat, but had an idea that the Democrats had lost touch with with pragmatic policies, and that liberal government was flawed in a lot of ways, but he was a believer in liberal government. It's now come to mean, it's a term of disapproval, I think, from the left to connote free market policies.
So for you?
When liberalism first appeared in the 19th century, it meant breaking with all of those feudal controls on capital and labor. And neoliberalism meant breaking with the Keynesian New Deal kind of politics, or in Europe, breaking with social democratic policies, breaking on such and so other restrictions on capital and labor, which meant weakening labor unions, which restrain the movement of capital and labor. So it became a very conservative doctrine.
Unleashing the banks, for example.
Yes.
Well, but it's, as you say, Dan, it's a sort of translation from a European term, and I think it comes from countries that have a stronger democratic socialist tradition as the baseline. So the idea that a left of center party would represent basically free market policies is a deviation from the norm. Whereas here, you've always had a Democratic Party. Democratic Party is not a socialist party, never has been, and has always operated within the constraints of the market, although it's argued for more regulated economy, a stronger welfare state. So that's sort of why I think, it's maybe a pedantic debate, but I don't think that term applies very well to American politics.
Jacob, you wrote a biography of Ronald Reagan in a presidential biography series that you contributed to. Are there parallels in the fear of Donald Trump that progressives have and the fear of Ronald Reagan going back to his election in 1980? Just from my own memory, I recall a very intense fear of Ronald Reagan, who after all had run on the right-wing edge of the Republican Party for years and years and years, was considered too conservative for the mainstream for a long time. And then as it became likely that he was going to be elected in 1980, people were thinking, oh my goodness, is he going to start a war with the Soviet Union? Is he racist? All this talk about welfare queens. Other things that made him an object of real fear among Democrats and liberals and progressives in a way that I think, and it's not a perfect parallel, but that in some ways is parallel to what we're seeing in fear of Donald Trump.
There are some parallels, and it's interesting. Both, of course, Reagan had been an actor. He'd come out of popular culture. Reagan had been governor of California for 8 years, and in fact, he'd been a fairly effective and non-radical governor of California. But he was still seen in a lot of ways as a figure outside of politics. People had trouble taking him seriously. And he was leader not only of a sort of conservative revolution inside the Republican Party, but a kind of populist movement. I think where the comparison breaks down, first of all, is just in terms of personal qualities. Donald Trump is this narcissist, extreme personality. Reagan was kind of a decent guy whose views were extreme in the context of the time. But Reagan, and this is how this election is different, Reagan was a conservative but conventional politician running in the context of a Democratic election. I really think we have a Democratic candidate who's running for president and a Republican nominee who's running for dictator. And that's what makes this election different from really every election that's come before it.
Where were you politically in 1980?
In 1980, well, can I go back a little earlier?
Sure.
In the period 1968 to the early 70s, I was at the University of California in San Diego, and we had come to know Ronald Reagan as governor.
Yes.
And Ronald Reagan had done something that those of us in the universities there were appalled by, which was he was the first person to put a tuition on what had been a free university. And this is, of course, one of the campaign issues of Bernie Sanders in this current campaign, that people like Bernie Sanders or myself, we went to school for free. And it's something I never forget to tell young people when I speak to them, why don't you go to school for free? So my knowledge and my impression of Ronald Reagan really had to do with that. So by the time I get to 1980, I've already recognized him as a very conservative candidate.
So maybe we need to go back even further. In 1964, as you know, Barry Goldwater was the Republican nominee, and he was considered the kind of scary outlier. In fact, I want to play a very famous ad for the Johnson campaign in '64 against Barry Goldwater. This is known as the Daisy ad, and this only aired once, but it had a tremendous impact history tells us, on people's perceptions of Barry Goldwater. Watch this ad.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
And before the announcer's voice, that was President Johnson's voice. That was considered beyond the pale after a while, right? I mean, to associate Barry Goldwater with a nuclear attack like that?
It was at the time. It's also, when you look at it now, boy, is that an effective piece of advertising, and in a lot of ways, you know, it has so few elements. I mean, you would never have an ad that was trying to just make one point in that simple a way now. I hope Democrats come up with something that effective to scare people about Donald Trump, because I think he's that scary, not particularly for the reason of the increased nuclear threat, although I think he's a dangerous person to have his finger on the button, but because he doesn't accept the premises of democratic government, including the separation of powers, independent judiciary, free press, and so on.
Can you imagine an ad? I realize you're not in this business,
Yeah.
You're a journalist, but could you imagine an ad that would do that? Because that Daisy ad kind of summed up, in a way, the fear of Barry Goldwater, and it represented it. The fear of Trump is diffuse. It's what you say, this authoritarianism. Mexicans have reasons to fear, Muslims have reasons to fear. It's kind of all over the place.
Right. And I think you have to find a way of painting him as outside of the American tradition, and whether that's putting him with his friend Vladimir Putin or putting him next to the tanks in Tiananmen Square, which he endorsed as a show of strength. I'm not sure that isn't,
Yeah.
You're right, it's not my business, but I think, sort of figuring out how to do that, how to fight back against him is an urgent problem right now. Hillary Clinton hasn't figured out how to do it.
You want to take a shot at being
Well, this ad brings something else to my mind, which is that the man that paid for the ad, that is, that Johnson, the man whose voice appears in the ad, then he gave us the Vietnam War, leading to the death of at least 54,000 Americans and 2 or 3 million Southeast Asians. So is there some, where was the real danger here? Who was the real threat? I mean, I think they're both the real threat, that is Goldwater and Johnson, in the same way that Hillary Clinton, who is a hawk, who is very friendly with the military and so on, it's not like this represents the peaceful alternative to a dangerous, warlike Trump.
All right, now, let's add another topic to the conversation. On Sunday, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico will hold its Democratic primary. Puerto Rico, the nation's most populous territorial island with more than 3.5 million residents, does send delegates to the conventions, but residents of the island who are U.S. citizens cannot vote for president in November. Got to be from a state, says the Constitution. The primary vote comes at a trying time. The island's economy, if you don't already know this, has been in recession for a decade. Its population has shrunk by more than 1% annually for 5 years. And now Puerto Rico is struggling with a staggering debt crisis with $72 billion owed to investors. Tension is high as the island is bound to miss a $2 billion payment due July 1st. In a March debate, before House Republicans put forward the current White House-supported bill to help Puerto Rico to reduce its debt, Hillary Clinton was asked whether she would put debt restructure on her first 100 days in office action list.
Absolutely, although I hope it happens before I am president, if I'm so fortunate enough to be. I have been calling for months that the Congress must give authority to Puerto Rico to restructure its debts, just like it has enabled states and cities to restructure their debt.
And Bernie Sanders, he's against the current bailout bill as too harsh. This is from a town meeting in Puerto Rico 2 weeks ago.
In the midst of this massive human crisis, it is morally unacceptable that billionaire hedge fund managers have been calling for even more austerity in Puerto Rico. Austerity will not solve this crisis.
And Donald Trump has said he knows more about debt than anybody and loves debt and loves reducing debt. No bailout, he says, de facto bankruptcy.
I will tell you, Puerto Rico has too much debt. So you can't just restructure. You have to use the laws. You have to cut the debt way down and get back to business because they can't survive with the kind of debt they have. So, no, I would not bail out if I were in that position. I wouldn't bail them out.
But would you let them have a bankruptcy option?
Well, they're going to have no choice because if they're not going to pay the bill, they're not going to pay the bill.
With us now via Skype from Puerto Rico, Rafael Bernabe. He was a 20th candidate for governor of the island, founder of El Partido del Pueblo Trabajador, that's the Working People's Party, and author of Puerto Rico and the American Century. Welcome to our program.
Glad to be with you.
Is the primary drawing much interest?
Well, the primary is drawing more interest than normal. Normally in Puerto Rico, the primaries of the U.S. parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, are rather limited affairs to the people who belong to these parties and who are very interested in U.S. politics. In this case, given the crisis in Puerto Rico and the importance of the positions of the candidates regarding the crisis in Puerto Rico, and I would have to say, given the presence of the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, which has generated a lot of interest because of the different nature of it in terms of what we are accustomed to in U.S. politics, I would say there's more interest than normal in the primaries, yes.
We played the clip of Sanders saying the solution to the debt crisis that's making its way through Congress is too harsh. Has Clinton taken a position that's been publicized down there?
The position of Hillary Clinton has been much more vaguer than the one of Sanders. She has said that Puerto Rico should be able to restructure its debt. She has not specified how that debt should be restructured and on what terms, nor has she taken a very clear stand against austerity measures, further austerity measures in Puerto Rico, so that she has said, yes, we have to take action regarding Puerto Rico. There's a very deep crisis, but her proposals are rather vague as opposed to those of Senator Sanders, which have been far more specific.
The mainland media has been assuming this is an easy win for Hillary Clinton. Given what we were just discussing, do you think Bernie Sanders might be more competitive than we assume?
Yeah, well, I think yes. I think it's going to be a very competitive process. It's hard to tell, as I said. It's hard to tell who will win. As happens in many states, in the U.S., Hillary Secretary Clinton has the support of the machinery of the party, let us say, of the traditional leaders of the Democratic Party in Puerto Rico. Senator Sanders has been able to mobilize a lot of people who have traditionally not been interested in U.S. primaries, traditionally have not been interested in the Democratic Party, but nevertheless they are very much interested in his program. So they will be participating in the primaries for the very first time.
Is the debt crisis an overwhelming issue for voters there right now?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The debt crisis and the economic crisis. Right now, Puerto Rico has already defaulted in this last payment on its debt, and it's facing a major default coming the next month. And needless to say, there's a lot of worry about what the consequences of that is going to be. The government has approved a moratorium law, which grants it the power to not pay portions of that debt. At the same time, the government has in the past, and it still maintains that position, has adopted many austerity measures in order to keep paying the debt. So everything is up for grabs. Everything is very much unclear what will happen. Will Congress approve this legislation? Will the government go forward with the not paying the debt, and so on and so forth?
Dan, let me bring you in here. What do you think of the legislation for Puerto Rico?
Well, I think it's not really acceptable. There should be, you can't have a restructuring that's going to bring austerity. There has to be a restructuring that, ideally you want to save Puerto Rico from this debt crisis, but you want to have an economy that creates full employment in Puerto Rico. People fleeing Puerto Rico in enormous numbers. Population is dwindling because of the economy is stalled, and so you can't just end the financial crisis. You have to say we're going to create an economy with jobs. You have to deal with have an adequate health system and education system and so on. So,
Mr. Bernabe, to mainlanders who think Puerto Rico got itself into this mess with unsmart borrowing, what would you say?
There are many levels to this crisis. The economy of Puerto Rico has not been growing for the past 10 years. It has been in crisis for the past 10 years. It's one of the big ironies of the situation in Puerto Rico that there are major U.S. corporations operating in Puerto Rico, pharmaceuticals for once are the most important ones, and they generate a tremendous amount of profit in Puerto Rico, about $35 billion a year. That's about 4 times the total tax income of the government of Puerto Rico in a year. And most of these companies pay very few taxes, very small taxes in Puerto Rico. And most of those profits are not reinvested in Puerto Rico. Now, the government of Puerto Rico, instead of reevaluating these tax policies, has indeed borrowed an incredible amount of money, and there's a limit to what you can do on that regard. So we think that we need to address the debt issue. That is, the debt has to be restructured, but we also have to devise new economic policies that allow Puerto Rico to begin growing again.
Mr. Bernabe, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Just 30 seconds left. I'm just curious for a prediction. If you each think, if Clinton wins New Jersey and California on Tuesday, will Sanders not fight for every superdelegate all the way to the convention, but suspend his campaign and work on the platform? What do you think?
I think he's going to continue to fight all the way to the convention, as he said. I think the one thing about him, whatever you like him or not, he seems to be a person of his word, a lot of integrity.
Jacob?
I don't know what Sanders will do. I do think the media is going to turn the camera off a little bit once the result is locked, because it's not going to be seen as relevant in the same way.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for coming in. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this hour calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Next time, will New Jersey put Clinton over the top in delegates even before the California polls close? And minutes later, will Bernie or Hillary emerge as most popular in the Pacific time zone? Tighten your seatbelts. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.